This morning, we are talking about what is Lent. Now, technically, Lent is the 40 days between Ash Wednesday and Easter Sunday. Now, this particular year, it's February 22nd to April the 9th. Now, what's interesting about this is, technically speaking, that's 46 days. But in the early church, they decided that the Sundays didn't count. So it's actually 46 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday. And we find that even from the earliest of times, that most Christian churches, whether it be Catholic or Lutheran, Greek Orthodox, even today we're seeing some of the fundamentalist and evangelical churches also wrapping themselves around this idea of Lent, a time of prayer, scripture reading, fasting in some cases, letting go, giving up, so that they can prepare, so that we can prepare to have this experience of Easter Sunday and the resurrection moment in a spiritual way, not just in a practical way. Unity also, for many, many years, has also had a belief and a teaching about Lent. Our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, wrote a book called Keeping a True Lent. And in the book, in the very beginning, like the first half of the book, is a lot of what we teach, of what we believe. The second half of the book is a daily reading, almost like the daily word in a sense. It's just a page of reading and an affirmation for reflection and, again, spiritual nourishment for our unfolding spiritually to receive. And I do use the word receive intentionally when it comes to Easter and resurrection. It's not something we just get, something we have. It's something that we truly spiritually receive, and we have to be open and ready for it. So what is this purpose? As I said, it's a prayerful time. And I thought it was interesting that officially the church at this time, we're talking about the Eastern Church, because there really wasn't any Western Church, around 325, after the Council of Nicaea, where Constantine tried, I suppose you could say, to get all the various Christian traditions together. They decided that, and let me add, because it's worth noting that Constantine's purpose was not spiritual. It was to increase the empire. So what happened as a result is that many people said, if I want a job, I need to be Christian. I got it. There was not the same sense prior to 325 that people came into the Christian tradition because of a fervent understanding and a relationship with God. It was more about being expedient on how to get a job in the newly founded capital of Constantinople. So what happened is the people who lived prior to the Council of Nicaea said, I think Christianity, it's like everybody can be a Christian now. And it used to be much more important, much more, it's kind of like the Marines. They just wanted a few good Christians. They didn't want everybody, but the door was opened and they couldn't go back. So the solution was to have these times of spiritual preparation, so that people could really anchor into the purpose and the intention and the teachings of the church. Now, this is not really new with 325. We have lots of writings from Augustine of Hippo. We have the church fathers, Irenaeus of Lyon. They were practicing this process of fasting and scripture reading and prayer hundreds of years before the Council of Nicaea. So we know that they were hearkening back to when Jesus went out into the wilderness for 40 days before he started his public ministry. And I think, oh, that's so interesting, because here he understands he has had a spiritual awakening, which we would call the baptism by John. He then, it's like you have this awakening, but what does it mean? How do you put feet on a spiritual awakening? And so he realizes that he has to go apart into the wilderness by himself, into the quiet, to really discern what it is that God was calling him to do. And that was what we would call the beginning of his public ministry. But again, this whole idea of preparation is not new with Jesus. And it's interesting too, because we know that the ancients were very keyed into numerology, just as they were to astrology, as we saw in the Christmas story and the story of the wise men. The term 40 comes in the Bible with not frequency, but almost poignancy. So it's one of those numbers that we really have to pay attention to. There are 3 key events of 40 in the Bible. The very first one you're going to find, of course, is Noah, the guy who went 2 by 2 into the ark. The second time was the 40 years of Moses wandering in the wilderness. You remember the guy that didn't ask for directions. And the third time is Jesus, and he only spends 40 days. Isn't that interesting? What did he do at night? I mean, in the ark, it specifically says Noah was there 40 days and 40 nights. But in Jesus' story, he's there 40 days. You see, we can't discount these as kind of quirky little things, somebody left them in or put them out. No, there is an intentionality about how this 40 days, what is trying to teach us about this 40-day process that we would call transformation. What is transformation? It's a time of really deep inner work. It's not just like a change of clothes or a change of heart. It is something profound. It is something that moves us in an entirely different direction. Now let's take the resurrection experience itself coming up in Easter Sunday, that we retell that story on April the 9th. You see, it's so important for us to understand that the resurrection story was not really told by Jesus. It was enacted by Jesus, but it was because the disciples had moved from they had been transformed from one place to another. The resurrection message lived in them. And that's why resurrection and its story and the retelling are heard by us today. It's because some people, we call the disciples, had an experience that transformed their life, and they began to share it with others. Human transformation. Now, we can talk about spiritual transformation, we can talk about human transformation, but you know, it's really interesting. When I looked up in the dictionary about transformation, it was talking about human transformation. So we can talk about physiological or psychological or mental, but it all comes back to the same point. And this I found very fascinating. It's an internal shift that realigns us to our highest potential. Almost today, like today, we had to rewind. Well, maybe we didn't rewind our clock. We let Google do it for us. But in the old days, we used to have to rewind the clock. It was a resetting, if you will, to invite us into the opportunity of what it is that is our spiritual potential and purpose. We do understand transformation. And as a case in point, 3 years ago today, not a one of us could spell Zoom. We had no idea what Zoom was. It was a global transformation. I remember that Sunday. It's the second Sunday in March, we're the second Sunday of March. And they came in, the city said, we've got to close churches down. Well, what is that? Okay, the congregation didn't come, but I came because all the equipment was there. And our sound team came, about 3 people. They came in and we all distanced from each other and wore masks. But then the city said, no, 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 you can't be even in the building. You can't be together at all. And so we all scrambled. Every church in the world scrambled for the same thing. How do we get our message out when all of our equipment is back in the building? So we had this global transformation that took the world as we knew it. We almost can't even remember what March 2020 felt like, what it looked like, our hopes and our dreams, because it just globally picked everybody up and moved them over here. Anytime in our life experience, there's a death of a loved one, a marriage, a graduation, maybe a divorce. Sometimes when things happen, and I've experienced this myself and I've watched it in other people, they will say, Marianne, I could never get up and I could never do a public speaking. I could never do that. And then they're asked to maybe say a few words at a funeral or to give the toast at a wedding. And because they love the person, they said, oh, okay, I'll do it, but I just know I can't. They're so convinced that they could never do it. What happens when they wake up the next day and they've done it? You see, what happens in our brain is that we begin to ask ourselves, we said we could not do this, but we did it. What else have I told myself that I could never do, that just maybe I can? When we travel, I see this often when we travel. I had a friend who said, Marianne, I can't go on a trip with you guys because I can't fly across the Atlantic Ocean. And it was kind of a curious thing to me. I'm like, well, you get in a plane, you don't really fly by yourself. There's like 350 other people and there's a big plane and a pilot and everything. No, you don't understand. I am afraid to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, she decided she wanted to go to France. And I thought, well, it's a long swim. Perhaps you want to get in the plane. And, in a way, we were kind of joking about it. But I didn't realize until we got to France, when we landed in France, how absolutely terrified she had been about flying across the ocean. And that when she did it, when she literally was in a total foreign country and she had flown across the Atlantic Ocean, her whole life, it was like a shell that just broke open to a new life. How often has that happened to you? But there's something about this 40. Let's, kind of weaving these two stories about transformation and 40 that I think we should take note of. It isn't just about Lent as February 22nd to, April the 9th. It's about our lives and the transformational journey we are on. Let me give you an example. Let's start with Moses because his was the longest, all right? Moses had a transformation journey of 40 years. He wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And I want you to think back on your life. Somewhere around your 35th to your 45th birthday, your life had a major shift. Now think about it. When I was 35, I walked into the door of a Unity church. Had no idea what a Unity church was. Hadn't been to church for a long time. I thought, well, I'll kind of hang out here, see what happens. By the time I was 40, less than 4.5 years later, I was a spiritual leader of a church. What happened? I look back on it now and I go, what? I just walked into the door of a church and said, oh, isn't this a cute little building? And I had been moved to a whole nother track. But that's not the only transformation you make. When you're around 75 to 85, there's another 40 in there. And subconsciously, we begin to understand that we're not having another 40 and that we begin to slowly but surely sort of settle in and take care of our affairs, if you will. I know my mother and my husband's mother gave us our baby books, and they started cleaning out closets, and they said, here, this is stuff for you. And, there's that sense of our lives are coming to completion. We're taking care of business. We're letting go of things that we need to let go of. And it's so important. I think we tend to discount these movements, these shifts. There's an energy involved in them, a transformational energy. And they're not just, on the birthday, on my 80th birthday, on my 40th birthday. It's a shifting, it's a movement. And when we can grab onto the power that's happening there, it's like we get lifted up. There's like an extra energy that helps to move us through that process. Noah was in the ark 40 days and 40 nights. And remember the story, Noah brings everything. He brings his family, he brings the 2x2, he brings everything. And that's kind of, to me, that's a lot like the way we do Lent in a typical year. I didn't leave home and go on retreat for these 40 days of between February and April. I'm still here. I've got my cell phone. I'm on Zoom. I'm doing my thing. And that idea of a transformational experience of preparation for Easter, it's like, yeah, I'll read the daily word twice or something. I'm not really as embedded into it as maybe I want to be or as I should be, because I brought all the stuff with me. I'm on the ark and the ark is full. Jesus's experience is very different, however. He goes alone. He goes in the silence because the desert is silent. And so what we see with Jesus is that there's like a hothouse container. It's like going on a spiritual retreat. And it invites that energy to sort of coalesce and be strong and powerful in our lives as we are in this process. Now, we don't necessarily need to go to a retreat center for 40 days, although it is kind of interesting to do so. We have spiritual tools that help us. And after all, we are 19 days into Lent already, so we're a little behind the curve. But what I recognize is that the 40-day transformational process is something we need to learn because it is a spiritual tool. And there are times in our life when we need to pick up a spiritual tool to help us. So a 40-day transformational process was taught to me by my minister and mentor, Reverend Shay St. John. Anytime I had a difficult decision, do a 40-day journal. Anytime I was to prepare for something like a trip, my first time to Israel, I wrote a 40-day journal because number one, I was scared out of my mind. It was my first trip internationally. And secondly, I was going to Israel and I wanted something transformational to happen. And God takes you at your word when you're really involved in it. And so I began to do a 40-day journal, counting out from when I was to leave. Got a journal. I wrote an affirmation. And one of the things that's very important about a 40-day journal that Shay would tell us often about is you can only do one thing at a time. Don't start saying, well, I want to, God, listen up. For 40 days, I want to talk about my health, and I want to talk about friends, and I want to talk about my money, and I want to talk about, no. Focus. Remember, Jesus's question was simply this: here am I, Lord, send me. But where are you sending me? What do you want me to do? That's really the essence of our question. You say, we distill it down to something that we can actually wrap our arms around. Then, and this is the most critical part, for 40 straight days, do not miss a day. Whatever the time you've decided, now I have a little post-it right here on my monitor, it says journal work, because 40 days from today, My friend and I are going on a retreat. I want that resurrection Easter experience. I want that transformation in my life, in my health, in my journey, in my spiritual journey. Where is God calling me to be right here and right now? Every evening, I shut my computer down and I begin to write. Begin to write for as long as I feel, usually 2 pages, to process about where I think I am. You see, a 40-day journal isn't got up this morning, took a shower, had 24 calories with chips, and then I exercised. No. We're talking about inner work. We're talking about spiritual work. And we write down for 40 days, 40 days, 40 days, 40 days. Here's the second thing. First of all, you have an affirmation, one focus. Don't reread your journal. You know, I don't know about you, but I got about a week into it and I go, I wonder what I said the first part of the week. No. You wait until you get all the way to the end of the 40 days. And then you find a nice quiet place for reflection, maybe a nice hot cup of tea, and you begin to read the process because it will begin to show itself in your own writing. And you will recognize words and phrases that you repeat over and over and over again. Ding! That's the spiritual insight you've been looking for. It's important to understand that we don't say, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a 40-day journal right now on abundance. And then I'll do one when I finish that one, I'll do it on health. No. This is a transformational journal. Remember, your life is going to be on this track and it's going to go to this track. So you have to assimilate that track, whatever it is that's new. Think of how long, we are 3 years into COVID. We still haven't really assimilated COVID into our psyche, how it's changed us. We get annoyed that there's not enough food in the grocery store, or there's not enough help at the bank, or there's not enough, not enough. And we're still struggling. We have not integrated the transformation that we globally have been through. So understand that this process is special. This process is unique. It's a tool that really does have a lot of power, because the one thing we really want to remember that is kind of hard for us to remember, we sort of think that God's forgotten about us. We're up here jumping up and down. Hey, God, are you listening to my prayer? And that's not the reality of it at all. We have moved away. We are no longer as intense, as in focused, as in real strength of our inner spiritual work, committed to our inner spiritual work. So like any good trip, whatever it may be, you prepare. Think, what are you going to pack? When are you going to go? You got the plane tickets. We're on a journey. We're on a lifelong journey. And every now and then we come to a bump in the road, and we need a spiritual tool to help us move through. So I hope by understanding Lent, its purpose, its intention, and its power, that it will also help you realize that transformative power of 40 days is something that you can utilize every time you are in the midst of uncertainty, of perhaps crisis, that will help you understand and bring you full circle back to the heart of God, where we long to be all along. Thank you for joining me today. God bless.